The train wheezed to a stop at Millbrook Station, black smoke billowing into the crisp autumn air. Sarah clutched her worn carpetbag tighter as she stepped onto the wooden platform, her heart hammering against her ribs. The letter in her coat pocket felt heavier than lead. After 3 days of travel from Philadelphia, she was finally here to meet Harold Winters, the man who had promised her a new life as his wife through their careful correspondence. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger. Thanks, and let's get back to the story. Sarah smoothed her best dress, though the fabric showed its age and the careful mending around the sleeves. She had spent her last $5 on train fare, arriving with nothing but hope and determination. Harold had written such kind letters, speaking of his successful dry goods business and his desire for a refined wife who could help him build a respectable household in this growing frontier town. A tall man in an expensive suit approached, his eyes scanning the few passengers who had disembarked. His gaze landed on Sarah and his expression immediately soured. This had to be Harold Winters. She had sent him her only photograph, taken 3 years ago when times were better, but she knew she looked different now. Months of worry and sparse meals had left their mark. Miss Sarah Coleman? His voice carried no warmth, only cold assessment. Yes, Mr. Winters. I'm so pleased to finally meet you. Sarah extended her gloved hand, trying to project confidence despite her nervousness. Harold ignored her gesture, his eyes taking in her patched dress, scuffed boots, and the frayed edges of her carpet bag. You look quite different from your photograph. Heat rose in Sarah's cheeks. I know I've changed some, but I assure you I'm still the woman who wrote to you. I'm hardworking, educated, and ready to be a good wife. A good wife needs more than willingness, Harold said loudly enough for other passengers to hear. She needs to bring something to the marriage. You look like you can barely afford your own meals, let alone contribute to a household. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She had been honest in her letters about her modest circumstances, though perhaps she had not emphasized just how desperate her situation had become after her father's death left her with nothing but debts. Mr. Winters, I understand I may not look like much right now, but I have skills. I can read and write, I know numbers and bookkeeping, and I'm willing to work hard. Work hard? Harold laughed harshly. I need a wife who can entertain my business associates, not a servant girl who looks like she's been living in the streets. This arrangement is clearly a mistake. By now, several townspeople had gathered to witness the spectacle. Sarah felt their stares burning into her as Harold continued his public humiliation. I'm sorry you've wasted your time traveling here, but I cannot possibly marry someone in your condition. Perhaps you can find work in the kitchen of one of the hotels. He turned to walk away, dismissing her completely. Sarah stood frozen on the platform, her entire world crumbling around her. She had sold everything she owned to make this journey, had pinned all her hopes on this marriage. Now she was stranded in a strange town with no money, no friends, and nowhere to go. That was unnecessary harsh. Harold. The quiet voice came from a man who had been loading supplies into a wagon nearby. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered hands and clothes that spoke of honest work rather than wealth. His brown eyes held kindness where Harold's had shown only disdain. Stay out of this, Thomas, Harold snapped. This is business, not charity. The man called Thomas stepped closer to Sarah.
Mom, I'm Thomas Mitchell.
I couldn't help but overhear, and I want you to know you're welcome to stay at my ranch until you can figure out your next step. It's not much, but it's honest shelter. Sarah looked into his earnest face, seeing genuine concern rather than pity. I couldn't impose on your kindness, Mr. Mitchell. I'm perfectly capable of finding my own way. I'm sure you are, but sometimes we all need a helping hand. I've got a ranch about 5 miles out of town. Could use someone to help with cooking and cleaning if you're willing to work for room and board while you get your bearings. Harold snorted. Thomas, you're being played for a fool. Can't you see she's looking for someone to take care of her? Thomas's jaw tightened. What I see is a lady who deserves to be treated with respect. Something you seem to have forgotten, Harold. Sarah felt tears threatening but forced them back. She had cried enough over the past year as her world had fallen apart piece by piece. This stranger's kindness felt like a lifeline, but she had learned to be wary of men's motives. Mr. Mitchell, if you're serious about the work, I accept. But I insist on earning my keep properly. Thomas nodded approvingly. Fair enough. Let me help you with your bag. As they walked toward his wagon, Sarah heard Harold call out, Don't come crawling back to me when you realize what kind of trouble you've taken in, Thomas. Thomas didn't even turn around. He helped Sarah into the wagon with the same courtesy he might have shown a queen, then climbed up beside her. As they drove through the town, Sarah got her first real look at Millbrook. It was larger than she had expected, with a main street lined with businesses, a church with a white steeple, and several residential streets stretching out from the center. It's a good town, Thomas said, noticing her observation. Growing fast with the railroad coming through. Harold's done well for himself with his store, but success doesn't always make a man better. They rode in comfortable silence for a while as the town gave way to open range. The landscape stretched endlessly under a vast sky, so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia. Sarah found herself breathing deeper, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. Tell me about your ranch, Mr. Mitchell. Call me Thomas, please. It's a cattle operation, though I've been struggling some since the drought last year. Lost about half my herd, and I'm still rebuilding. The house isn't fancy, but it's solid and clean. Sarah appreciated his honesty. After Harold's deception, straightforward talk felt refreshing. I meant what I said about earning my keep. I'm good with numbers and organization, and I can cook simple meals. Thomas glanced at her with interest. Numbers, you say? I'll be honest, Miss Coleman. I'm not much for bookkeeping. Been letting things slide more than I should. Sarah, please, and I'd be happy to help with that. My father ran a small business back east, and I handled most of his accounts. They talked easily as the wagon rolled across the prairie, and Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time in months. Thomas spoke about his cattle, the challenges of ranching, and his plans for improving his land. He listened when she talked about her life in Philadelphia, her father's illness, and the debts that had forced her to seek a new start out west. The ranch house came into view as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. It was a modest two-story building with a wide porch, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. Simple but well-maintained, it spoke of a man who took pride in his work. It's beautiful, Sarah said, and meant it. After the cramped boarding house where she had spent her final weeks in Philadelphia, this felt like a palace. Thomas helped her down from the wagon, his calloused hands gentle and respectful. Let me show you to the spare room. It's not much, but it's private and has a good window. The room was indeed simple, furnished with just a bed, dresser, and chair, but it was clean and bright. Sarah set her carpetbag on the bed and turned to face Thomas, who lingered uncertainly in the doorway. Thomas, I want you to know how grateful I am. You didn't have to help me today. Yes, I did, he said quietly. No woman should be treated the way Harold treated you. You seem like a decent person who's hit some hard times. We all need help sometimes. Over the following days, Sarah threw herself into work around the ranch. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, organized Thomas's chaotic kitchen, and prepared simple but hearty meals. Most importantly, she tackled his neglected bookkeeping with the skill her father had taught her. What she found in his ledgers alarmed her. Thomas was a good rancher but a poor businessman. He was charging too little for his cattle, paying too much for supplies, and had no clear picture of his financial situation. Worse, he owed money to the bank, and the payment schedule was unrealistic given his current income. Thomas, we need to talk, Sarah said one evening after dinner. She had spread his ledgers across the kitchen table, along with her own careful calculations. He sat down across from her, his expression wary. That bad, huh? It's not good, but it's not hopeless either. You're a fine rancher, but you're being taken advantage of in your business dealings. Sarah showed him her analysis, explaining how he could negotiate better prices, reduce unnecessary expenses, and restructure his debt payments. Thomas listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and showing a quick grasp of the concepts once they were clearly explained. You've got a head for this, he said admiringly. My pa always said I was better with cattle than with numbers. Numbers are just another tool like a rope or a branding iron. Once you understand how to use them, they can work for you instead of against you. They worked together late into the evening, developing a plan to turn his finances around. Sarah felt more useful than she had in months, and Thomas's respect for her abilities was evident in his attention to her suggestions. Word of Sarah's presence at the ranch spread quickly through the small community. When she accompanied Thomas to town for supplies the following week, she could feel the curious stares and whispered conversations. Harold had been spreading rumors about her character, painting her as a fortune hunter who had manipulated kind-hearted Thomas into taking her in. "Maybe I should leave," Sarah said as they drove home with their supplies. "People are talking, and it's not fair to you." Thomas's hands tightened on the reins. "Let them talk. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not easily fooled. And anyone who meets you can see what kind of person you really are." But the gossip took its toll. When Sarah attended church the following Sunday, several women turned away from her, and she overheard whispered comments about that desperate mail-order bride and poor Thomas being taken in by a scheming woman. The situation came to a head 2 weeks later when Harold arrived at the ranch with an official-looking document. Thomas was out checking cattle, so Sarah faced him alone on the porch. "I have a proposition for you," Harold said without preamble. "Leave town quietly, and I'll give you enough money for train fare back east." "Why would you do that?" "Because Thomas is a good man who deserves better than a gold-digging opportunist. You're destroying his reputation in this community." Sarah kept her voice steady despite her anger. "I'm working for my room and board, nothing more." "Are you?" "Because I've heard you're meddling in his business affairs, probably positioning yourself to get your hands on his property. I'm helping him organize his books because he asked me to. There's nothing inappropriate about it." Harold stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I also know you're behind schedule on his loan payments. One word from me to the bank about his current situation, and they'll foreclose immediately." The threat hung in the air between them. Sarah realized that Harold had more power than she had understood. As a successful businessman, his word would carry weight with the bank officials. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "I want you gone. Tonight. Thomas will get over his infatuation soon enough, and his life can return to normal. And if I refuse, then Thomas loses his ranch, and it will be your fault for distracting him from his responsibilities." Sarah's mind raced. She had grown to care deeply for Thomas and his ranch. The thought of her presence causing him to lose everything was unbearable. At the same time, she knew that Harold's threats came from jealousy and spite rather than genuine concern for Thomas. "I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I make my call to the bank." Harold left her standing on the porch, her heart heavy with the impossible choice before her. When Thomas returned that evening, she struggled to act normally, but he sensed something was wrong. "Sarah, what's troubling you? You've been quiet all evening." She looked at his honest, concerned face and made her decision. "Thomas, I need to tell you something about Harold's visit today." She explained everything, including the threats and ultimatum. Thomas's face grew darker with each word, and by the time she finished, his jaw was set in a hard line. "That snake," he muttered, "using the bank against me because he can't stand that you chose to stay here instead of crawling back to him. Thomas, maybe he's right. Maybe I should leave before I cause you more trouble." Thomas stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Sarah Coleman, don't you dare let that man drive you away. You've done nothing but good since you've been here. This ranch is running better than it has in years, and not just because of the bookkeeping. But if he calls in your loan, then we'll face it together. I'm not letting Harold Winters dictate my life or yours." The next morning, Harold arrived as promised, but he wasn't alone. Thomas was waiting for him on the porch, with Sarah standing beside him. "I hope you've come to your senses, Thomas," Harold said coldly. "I have. I've decided to ask Sarah to marry me." The words hung in the morning air like a thunderclap. Sarah turned to stare at Thomas in shock, while Harold's face turned an ugly shade of red. "You can't be serious," Harold sputtered. "I'm completely serious. Sarah, I know this isn't the most romantic proposal, but I've been thinking about it for days. You're the smartest, kindest, most capable woman I've ever met. I'd be honored if you'd consider being my wife." Sarah's heart raced. She had begun to have feelings for Thomas, but she had assumed they were one-sided. Now, faced with his proposal, she realized how much she had come to love this gentle, honest man. "Thomas, she began, then stopped. "Are you asking because you care for me, or because you want to protect me from Harold?" Thomas stepped closer, taking her hands in his calloused ones. "I'm asking because I love you, Sarah. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you stood up to Harold with such dignity. These past weeks, watching you work, seeing how you care for this place and for me, it's just confirmed what I felt from the beginning." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes, Thomas. Yes, I'll marry you. Harold made a sound of disgust. This is ridiculous. Thomas, you're making the biggest mistake of your life. No, Thomas said, his arm sliding around Sarah's waist. The biggest mistake would be letting you drive away the best thing that's ever happened to me. Fine, but don't expect any help from me when your finances collapse. In fact, I think I'll have that conversation with the bank today after all. Go ahead, Thomas said calmly. Sarah and I have been working on a plan to restructure the debt. We've also secured a contract to supply beef to the railroad construction crews. Amazing what you can accomplish when you have someone who understands business on your side. Harold's face went white. The railroad contract was something he had been trying to secure for his own suppliers, and the commission alone would be enough to put Thomas's finances on solid ground. You're bluffing. Sarah smiled and pulled a document from her pocket. The contract was finalized yesterday. Thomas was too modest to mention it, but his reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing impressed the right people. It's amazing what happens when you present yourself professionally and have your numbers in order. Harold snatched the contract and read it, his expression growing more furious with each line. This is impossible. How did you? Hard work and honest dealing, Thomas said simply. Something you might try sometime. Harold threw the contract back at them and stalked off, muttering threats and curses. Sarah and Thomas watched him go, then turned to each other with relieved laughter. Did we really do that? Sarah asked. We did. And Sarah, I meant every word I said about loving you. This isn't just about standing up to Harold. I know. I love you too, Thomas. I never thought I'd find someone who could see past my circumstances to who I really am. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church, with most of the town attending. Even some of the women who had initially been cold to Sarah came forward to congratulate her, won over by the obvious love between the couple and the positive changes they had brought to Thomas's ranch. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the porch of their home, her hand resting on her growing belly, watching Thomas work with the cattle in the distance. The ranch was thriving. They had paid off the bank loan early, and their love had only grown stronger through the challenges they had faced together. Harold had left town shortly after their wedding, his business suffering after word spread about his treatment of Sarah and his attempts to manipulate Thomas. The new owner of the dry goods store was a kind man who treated all his customers with respect, regardless of their circumstances. As the sun set over the prairie, Thomas rode up to the house and dismounted, his face lighting up when he saw her. How are my 2 favorite people today? He asked, kissing her gently and placing his hand over hers on her belly. We're perfect, Sarah replied, knowing that she had found something more valuable than all the wealth in the world. She had found a man who loved her for who she was, a home where she belonged, and a future full of hope and possibility. Let others chase after gold and silver. She had discovered that true riches came from love, respect, and building something meaningful together with the right person.